Hidden from public view for 20 years.
I think I'm an ordinary sort of bloke, really. Always have been. All right, one night 20 years ago, I tried to set off a hydrogen bomb. Lots of people do stupid things when they're young, don't they?
In the early hours of Saturday the 21st of November 1970, John Irwin, then serving as an airman at RAF Brackenham in Suffolk, seized control of a hydrogen bomb and attempted to detonate it.
What made me do it? I think I just felt a bit down, really. And you know how it is when you're not feeling very happy. You want to make everybody else feel miserable as well, don't you?
For 20 years, details of the Irwin incident have been kept secret. Tonight, This is David Harper looks at that incident, the events that led up to it, and the complete government cover-up that followed, and asks the questions: how much of a threat is Britain's nuclear threat to Britain, and how many times have we been threatened with it?
Nowadays, I just look back on it as an interesting experience. I mean, how many ordinary servicemen can stand up and say, I tried to set off an H-bomb? Only 27 that I can think of.
RAF Brackenham in Suffolk. Bomber Command's nuclear frontline. On Friday the 20th of November 1970, at approximately 23:40, 11:40 p.m., Squadron Leader Pat Parsons and Major Calvin Heisinger of the United States Air Force are walking home after an evening at the officers' mess.
You're always the same.
Taking a shortcut across the base, they're about to walk past Unit B119 when Major Heisinger notices that its door is open and that the light inside is on. This worries Major Heisinger because he knows that Unit B119 houses a hydrogen bomb. The glance Major Heisinger then throws into Unit B119 is enough to sober him up immediately, because what he sees is Airman John Irwin sitting on the hydrogen bomb and clutching in each hand a live hand grenade. 1 hour later, at 1 o'clock on Saturday morning, assembled in Unit B119, because John Irwin has summoned them to be there, are Squadron Leader Pat Parsons, Major Calvin Heisinger, Group Captain Geoffrey Barnett, the base commander, and Flight Sergeant Trevor Houghton. Houghton, in compliance with Irwin's wishes, has just stripped down to his underwear, placed a fire bucket over his head, and started to count down from 9,999. And for the next 4.5 hours, this is how they were to remain. 4.5 hours in which the fate of a large part of Suffolk seemed to hang entirely in the balance, and also in which, outside these four walls, the rest of RAF Brackenham was a maelstrom of panic-stricken activity, as people living near the base remember.
But there were sirens going off, engines revving, men running out the gates. Some of them were crying, one of them was screaming, "Not me, please God, not me." It was very hard to get to sleep, wasn't it?
Oh, it's impossible. In the end, I went downstairs to make a cup of tea, and when I did, I saw there were 9 men in RAF uniforms all trying to cram themselves into our Hillman imp, shouting, "Let's get the hell out of here, we're all going to die," things like that.
Did you challenge them about it?
Well, Norman did, didn't he?
Yes, but they just said they're on an initiative exercise. Then 2 of them pointed guns at me, so I thought, let's let them get on with it.
And did they drive off in your car?
8 of them did. 1 couldn't get in. He staggered off on our Kevin's roller skates.
In the days immediately following the incident, journalists repeatedly contacted the Ministry of Defence requesting information about what had happened. They got very little.
Well, they told us virtually nothing. They said a serviceman had got hold of a small quantity of explosives and threatened to destroy a toilet facility, that was all.
Was Unit B119 ever used as a toilet facility, do you know?
I expect it was that night. That's purely incidental, isn't it?
The events that took place at RAF Brackenham 20 years ago would still be a closely guarded secret had it not been for this man, Calvin Heisinger, United States Air Force Major, retired. That the details of what actually happened on that night are now out in the open is due entirely to Kelvin Heisinger's recent decision to bring a legal action against the RAF, who, he is claiming, are responsible for the existence of his fourth son, Leonard.
We did not want Leonard. We still don't want Leonard. And we never would have had Leonard if I'd been able to sleep better. It's what happened at RAF Brackenham 20 years ago that kept me awake the night we inadvertently conceived Leonard. And that is why I say the RAF should put Leonard through college. I certainly don't see why we should have to do it.
In papers already presented in court in America, the RAF have made clear that they do not dispute Major Heisinger's contention that a hydrogen bomb was present in Unit B119 that night. Does this mean that the authorities are at last effectively admitting that there was one in there?
There was a bomb in there, of course. But it's not a matter of anyone finally admitting it. The fact was never denied.
But in an answer to Parliament 2 years after the incident, you yourself stated that no part of Britain's nuclear deterrent had been involved in the incident.
That's right.
Well, wasn't the hydrogen bomb in Unit B119 part of Britain's nuclear deterrent?
Not on that night it wasn't, no.
Why wasn't it?
Because on that night we were not in a position to use it to deter anybody. The chap sitting on top of it wouldn't have let us.
Lord Mappleton's parliamentary private secretary at the time of the incident was Sir Hugo Minter. In his posthumously published memoirs, Sir Hugo tells us,
Alec, Lord Mappleton, said at the time that we'd all had an incredibly lucky escape. If the bomb had gone off, it would have been virtually impossible to have kept Parliament from hearing about it.
I never said anything of the kind.
It's a lie, then?
It's a lie. And it's particularly unfair of him to make such an accusation now that he's dead.
Certainly the government had good reason to fear the consequences were the events that took place at RAF Brackenham to be made public. At the time, they were locked in a fierce propaganda war with CND. Graham Grindle has been a member of CND since the early 1960s. He remembers official attitudes towards the movement at the time.
They were very anti-us. We were constantly being harassed. MI5 were involved. I remember waking up one morning and finding I'd had a burglary. And that very morning I was supposed to be taking part in a march to Aldermaston.
And you think that MI5 performed the burglary in order to prevent your taking part in that march?
Yes, I do.
Why do you think that?
Because the only thing that was missing was my duffel coat.
In the months leading up to the Irwin incident, official sensitivity concerning bases like RAF Brackenham was further heightened by a series of peace protests provoked by events in the Vietnam War and directed against what was perceived as Western militarism.
Well, there were a lot of protests up at the camp, weren't there? Hundreds of hippies singing, smoking things, putting flowers in soldiers' guns. They had all your lobelia up, didn't they?
I was absolutely livid.
It was a shame, especially since it was the last year he could grow flowers out there. In the August, there was an accident up at the base, and the RAF had to come round and take all our soil away.
What sort of accident?
Dunno. We're not supposed to talk about it anyway, because after they hosed us down, they made us sign the Official Secrets Act.
Neither the government nor the RAF have ever made any detailed statement about that accident. In August 1970, a number of families living near the base had their soil removed by the RAF, didn't they?
Yes.
Why was that?
It was done purely for operational reasons. To prevent the danger of incoming pilots being distracted from the landing lights by row upon row of gaudy flowers.
And why, after August 1970, were 2 buildings on the base concreted up and buried under 50 tons of gravel?
Well, that was part of a modernization program. The 2 buildings concerned were no longer needed.
Seems a rather elaborate way of dealing with buildings that are no longer needed, doesn't it?
I think there was some concern about squatters.
They hadn't then somehow become massively contaminated with highly toxic radioactive substances?
No.
For 20 years, the details of what happened the night John Irwin entered Unit B119 with 2 hand grenades have been a closely guarded secret. Only now that that secret is out, are we in a position to ask, why did it happen?